So let's continue with what we have been doing in the previous classes. Okay, so mainly we were exploring the spectrum of hydrogen like atoms basically, and the corrections that come into them because of let's say relativistic effects, which is the fine structure effects, because of uh, presence of an electric field, presence of a magnetic field, so Stark effect, Zeeman effect, and so on. Okay, so we'll continue with that. uh, Okay, and there's one more set of corrections left for us to do, which is the hyperfine corrections, basically, where the nucleus will also start playing a role. So till now, whatever we have discussed is just coming from the electron. So whatever corrections the electron can do, or electron interacts with external fields, those corrections matter. And then in addition to this, there will be other corrections, which are the hyperfine corrections, which come from the role of the nucleus. Okay, so that we will do on Monday, etc. But today we will just do the following. So we'll look at selection rules basically. So I use some selection rules explicitly. Um, Delta L has to be 1, delta M has to be 0, depending on linearly polarized light, or delta M has to be 1, circularly polarized light, things like that, etc. So, how do those selection rules come about? That is what we are going to see in half of the lecture today. Then we will, so the second point is, we look at the broad picture. Okay, how do all of these different effects basically combine? Okay, of which hyperfine effects we are still to do, but broadly. Okay, so I'll update this in the A, but right now I was having some sync issues, so it is still blank. And then I'll review some problems basically related to what we did in the previous two classes: magnetic field, electric field, and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead with the selection rules basically. Okay, and selection rules will mostly arise that electrons can jump between these levels to that levels, etc., because of the perturbation by light, etc. And that is mostly decided by this quantity, which was this, the polarization vector dot RBA, etc., where the RBA will be the matrix element between states B and A of the R vector between whatever system we are considering, etc. And for experimental purposes, the polarization vector can be either linearly polarized light or circularly polarized light, basically. Okay, so two cases you need to consider differently. And okay, so then um, okay, so let's go digress a bit and discuss about scalar and vector operators, and how do they what is their commutation relations with the J, the total angular momentum operator for any problem. Okay, so you can define a scalar operator as anything whose expectation value remains unchanged by a rotation of the coordinate system. Okay, and we will, you must have already seen in your quantum mechanics course that in quantum mechanics, basically the operator which generates rotation of the coordinate system is the J operator basically. So small rotations are generated by e to the power I J times whatever angle we want to rotate in basically. So Jx times theta x and things like d theta x and things like that. Okay. So J is the generator of the rotation operator in quantum mechanics, and this statement basically will translate to, if I do the mathematics right, etc., that the commutator between O and J has to be 0. So if O commutes to G with J, that means that O commutes with the generator of small rotations. So for any small rotation, O times the small rotated coordinate frame, it will commute, and I can keep adding these small rotations, etc., to generate any finite rotations basically. And I will still have that, transformed operator commute with the old operator, and that is the statement basically. Okay, so the commutator of O with J is 0. Okay, and then so if these two commutes basically, then O I can express in terms of the eigen functions of the J operator, and the J operator will have eigen functions which are expressed in terms of the J square eigenvalues. So the small j's, or the Jz eigenvalues, which is the Mj basically. Okay. So any scalar operator I can write in terms of, so the eigenvalues of the scalar operator will also be eigenvalues of the rotation operator basically. Okay, but mostly we are not interested about scalar operators, we are mostly interested about vector operators, etc., For example, the angular momentum itself turns out to be a vector operator, right? So it will have three components: jx, jy, jz, lx, ly, lz for the spin, sx, sy, sz, and so on. Okay. The position operator also is a vector operator. It has three components and so on. Okay. And an operator can be defined as a vector operator. Again, if its expectation value doesn't depend on the rotation of the coordinate axis, etc. And that will again translate to, okay, so that translates to slightly more complicated commutation relation. And the commutation relation is the following. So amongst the let's say I component of the j operator and the vj component of the this whatever vector operator we are looking for, etc. I have this commutation relation ihvk times epsilon ijk. Okay, and many of you would be familiar with this relation. I also made you derive this in the midsem exam for the jijj operator. Okay, so these are a generalized version of those relations, and these are valid for any other vector operator also, which depends on let's say j basically. Okay, and yeah, so there may be some other subset of operators which may commute with ji etc. Then it will be zero, of course. But if I am writing the total angular momentum j, then l is also a part of it, s is also a part of it, and all of these relations will also be valid if I choose vj as l or whatever, etc. Okay, so that you can show explicitly. Okay, and epsilon ijk is the third rank antisymmetric tensor, which is called the Levi-Cavita symbol. So ijk is 1 if I go in cyclic way x, y, z. So x, y, z it is 1, y, z, x it is 1, and then z, x, y it is 1. Any other combination which involves all three coordinates, it is minus 1. And if two of the coordinates are same, j is k. So x, y, y, for example, then it is 0. X, z, z, it is 0. Y, z, z, it is 0, and so on, basically. So the normal antisymmetric Levi-Cavita symbol. Okay. Okay. So that is number one. And then for any vector operator, it is useful to define these combinations, which are called v1 and v minus 1, etc. Why? Writing them in terms of complex numbers, etc. So v1 becomes minus of vx plus I vy by root 2, etc. And this will become useful when we deal with circularly polarized light, because circularly polarized light also I can express in this notation. Ex plus I ey divided by root 2 for one polarization, and v minus 1 is the other polarization, where it is vx minus I vy by root 2, and v0 is vz. So if the light is propagating along z, then typically the polarization of light along z is 0, and that would be sort of an example of the linear polarization of light. Okay, so this was a detour basically. And similar to these combinations for the polarization of light also, I already said that we can define epsilon 1, 0, and minus 1, etc. And that allows us to think in terms of circular polarized light and linear polarized light and so on. Okay. And just continuing on this notation, so what will be useful is R also I can write in terms of these three vectors. So R1, R0, and R minus 1, etc. So R1 becomes minus 1 by root 2 x plus iv. So R has x, y, z as components, etc. And that just becomes, if I write in polar coordinates, etc., then minus 1 by root 2 r sine theta times e to the power I phi. Okay. And this is still, okay, so this is still useful. When I do angular integrations, etc., I can use the explicit forms. Okay. But even more useful is it will become when I express it in terms of the spherical harmonic coordinates. Okay. In that case, we will be able to use the known properties of the spherical harmonic coordinates functions basically to do our calculations. Okay. And if I write this guy, then it will just become 4 pi by 3 to the power half r, which is just the distance, times y11 basically. So L is equal to 1, M is equal to 1, of function of theta and phi. Okay. And R0 becomes Z is equal to R cos theta. And that if you write in terms of Y, it will become R4 pi by 3 to the power half Y10 theta phi and so on. Okay. And similarly, R minus 1 I can write, and that will become, same prefactors with R, etc. and Y1 minus 1, etc. So this is the advantage that I can write R components in short form as Y1 and Q basically, where Q can take values of 0, 1, and minus 1, etc. Okay. And then ultimately, you remember, I am going to do this evaluation of this kind of a optical matrix element, right? So this will become easy if I have circularly polarized light, etc. Then I'll just do epsilon 1 R1 plus epsilon 0 R0 plus epsilon 2 R2 for circularly in the circular basis. And for linearly polarized light, I'll just calculate straightforward, epsilon x sigma x, Rx plus epsilon y sigma y and sigma z basically. Okay. So that's just a starting point. So definition of notations, etc. to ease with the calculation. Okay. Okay. So now we can go back to the optical matrix element. Okay. So we had this quantity epsilon dot RBA. No. Okay. And this you can explicitly show. Okay, I can write in terms of the Cartesian coordinates. So epsilon Q times RBA Q component, etc., where Q can now take values 0 and plus minus 1. So this you can show explicitly. Other way, you can also use Q as X, Y, Z, and it will give you the identical result basically. Okay. And since we will be talking about hydrogen atoms, it is useful to remember that the B and A, one state to the other state, etc., had 3 quantum numbers to denote them, let's say without spin. So N, L, and ML, let's say, and B can be some other state, N prime, L prime, and ML prime, basically. So M, the subscript L is missing, but you should understood that this is the M corresponding to L. Okay. Okay. So that is number one. And then the major part of the selection rules, which levels I can jump between and not, will come from the calculation of this RBA Q, basically. Okay. So now let's write this explicitly, because RBA, so each of these B and A levels have a radial component and the angular component, etc. So I can explicitly write down the expectation value of this operator, let's say. So RBAQ then becomes, some integral, let's say, which I have defined as, IQ, because the Q component, so IQ, which will depend on these numbers, N prime, L prime, M prime, and NLM, basically is equal to, so 4 pi by 3 root came from the R operator, if you remember. Okay. So one, I had the R operator, then I had the radial part. So the radial part is, R squared dr. And then in the R operator, I had another R. Okay, so that becomes R cube and the radial wave function component. So Rn prime L prime R, Rn L R. Basically, I'll integrate from 0 to infinity since I'm in spherical polar coordinates. This is the radial part, and then this has to multiply with the angular part, d sine theta, d theta, d phi, which I have written as d omega. So the solid angle, d omega. And then I'll have one spherical harmonic complex conjugate corresponding to, let's say, the B, which is L prime M prime theta phi. Okay. The spherical harmonic do not depend on N, so that you have to remember, right? And that N has already gone into the R. Okay. So this, then the R operator gave me a Y1Q, basically. Okay. So the R operator, if you remember, we wrote as Y11, Y10, and Y1 minus 1. So the R operator gave me a Y1Q theta phi. Okay. And then I had another YLM, basically theta phi coming from the A operator. Okay. Then, yeah, so that gives us the setting for calculating all the optical selection rules and things like that. Okay. Now it turns out that the radial part of the integral, so this integral, dr integral, is always non-zero. Okay, so that you can calculate, etc., and it is always finite. So that will never give you any trouble. Okay. So no selection rules will come out of that. Okay. And the d omega integral will turn out to be, explicitly 0 for some specific choices of L, M, L prime, M prime, or some their combinations. And that gives you the selection rules, basically. Okay. So that's what will give you the selection rules. Okay. Okay. And then there are 3 different ways of thinking about the selection rules. So one is parity. Another one is magnetic quantum number. So the M prime integral. Okay. And the third one is orbital angular momentum. So we will look at each of these one by one, basically. Okay. And roughly, I can see already from here that, this is the angular momentum L prime. This is the angular momentum L, and this is the channel of angular momentum 1. And they are typically non-zero only when the total angular momentum of all three channels will combine to zero. Okay. Roughly, basically, broadly. Okay. But before going there explicitly, let's see what I mean by parity. So parity is a symmetry where R goes to minus R, basically. So this is also called inversion. Yeah, so in high energy physics, it is typically called parity, and in condensed matter, some people will also use the word inversion. Okay, or another word people use is centrosymmetric, meaning R goes to minus R, everything is same. Then the system is centrosymmetric, and if R goes to minus R, the system is not same, meaning xyz and minus xyz, the system has different properties. Then it is non-centrosymmetric. Okay, uh, yeah. So any let's say object can be a eigenfunction of this symmetry or not, basically. Okay. Okay, but suppose I send to R to minus R, then what do I mean? So I had this wave function of the hydrogen atom. Let's think in terms of those. Okay, so R was already the spherical coordinate, so RNL will not change, so it will remain RNL R, etc. But YLM will go to YLM. The theta and phi have changed, etc. So Z I have changed to Z to minus Z. Okay, and Z to minus Z change amounts to basically theta going to pi minus theta. Okay, so that you can also calculate from here explicitly. R goes to minus R, Rx over Z goes to minus Rx minus Ry minus Rz. And then in terms of spherical polar coordinates, also I reverse the signs. And if you just want to make sense of this, etc., then you can easily check that if you just substitute theta to pi minus theta and phi to, so phi goes to minus phi, but phi is 0 to 2 pi, etc. So I take phi from 0 to pi and then I add a phi, basically. And similarly, theta went from this side to, let's say, this side. So I had pi by 2, and then for pi by 2, I'll add another theta, that is number 1. Or I can do pi minus theta. Okay, so keeping the notation consistent so that theta lies between 0 to pi by 2, etc. So this is what we have. Okay, so if I do this, then I get this RNL times YNLM of pi minus theta and phi plus pi. Okay, and as soon as you go and substitute this angular change in the corresponding functions, etc., all of this just amounts to minus 1 to the power n, basically. Okay, and I recover the whole function, basically. So in going from R to minus R, the hydrogen atom wave functions I have changed from just by a factor of minus 1 to the power L, basically. Okay, so that just means that whatever function, I have a wave function which is even in L, will have no change. So it is centrosymmetric wave function. And whatever wave function has an odd L is a non-centrosymmetric wave function, and it gets multiplied by a minus sign, basically. Okay, so that's the parity. And then, okay, so why did we do all of this, etc.? So then I can go back here, etc. So if I do the parity transformation and I look at this I, the optical matrix integral, etc., then all of this I can pull out. So uh, L prime, so minus 1 to the power L prime, minus 1 to the power 1, and minus 1 to the power L, basically. So if I do that, then under R going to R minus R vector, sorry, so here vectors, I, this integral goes to minus 1 to the power L plus L prime plus 1, I n prime L prime M n L M and so on. Okay, and that just shows that the integral uh, of I, the kernel, will become an odd function or an even function depending on L prime combination being equal to 1 or not being equal to 1, let's say. So the total number is odd or even, basically. Okay, and then the optical matrix element is non-zero only if L prime 1 is even, basically. Okay, so if minus 1 to the power L, it turns out to be even, because otherwise the integration kernel will become an odd function and it vanishes. Okay, so that's the That's the optical selection rule, which comes out of parity, basically analysis. Okay, and dipole operator only connects states of opposite parity, basically. So if L and L prime have the same parity, so if both of them are odd, let's say, then L prime is even, plus 1 is an odd number. So minus 1 to the power L makes the function even odd function, which vanishes basically. So L prime better be of opposite parities, basically. So one of them may be even, one of them may be odd, etc. And then I am satisfy the parity. So dipole operator only connects states of opposite parity. So that's all I can say from this analysis. Okay. So any questions for this? No. Okay. So let's proceed basically. Okay. Okay. So this is one, right? So according to this, then I would say, del L. So L minus L prime I write as, the change in angular momentum, etc., is a odd number. Okay. That's what will be the outcome of this basically. Okay. And then when I take this analysis to another more thorough analysis, etc., in addition to parity, I go and I will check the angular momentum addition, etc. Then you will find that this number is non-zero. So delta L, only one is allowed actually. Okay. Delta L 3, 5, 7 are also not allowed. So I can only jump between states, for optical transitions, which have delta L is equal to 1. So that is very remarkable, because then I cannot go from 1s state to 2s state. Okay. I can go only from 1s state to 2p state, and so on. From 2p, I cannot go to 3p. From 2p, I can only go to 3s or 3d state. I cannot even go to 3f state and things like that. Okay. So it rules down a lot of optical transitions. And once I figured this out, I do not need to calculate explicitly those transition probabilities or optical matrix elements and things like that. Okay, so this was about L, and when I do the analysis in the angular momentum channel, that will also give me some condition on L. Okay, but the magnetic quantum number also gives me a condition on M. Okay, so let's look at what this is. Okay, so if you remember, so we have this integral, and y, the phi integral, just comes from e to the power I m phi in ylm basically. Okay, so I pick out the phi contribution from here, here, and here, etc., and that will just give me an integral, which is the phi integral part of the I, which is, I've defined it as j, and that will only depend on m prime and q. Q was the quantum number of the R operator. I am R plus, R minus, R1, R minus 1, or 0. Okay, and that gives me this d phi e to the power I m plus q minus m prime phi. Okay, and this is nice because anything which gives me a finite number here, that will send this integral to 0 basically, because this is a periodic integral. I go from 0 to 2 pi, so I get 0 basically. Okay, so you can consider two different cases, let's say. So let's say consider q is equal to 0. Okay, so the polarization is along z axis, and the light must have been propagating either along x or y, or in the xy plane, let's say, anywhere. Then the polarization is along z direction, and then of course the integral will vanish unless m is equal to m prime. So q is equal to 0, meaning the integral will become finite only if uh, exponential times I0 basically I have, right? So that I have a 1, so only integral of d phi, so that will give me 2 pi or something like that. Okay, so for linearly polarized light along the z axis, I will just get this integral as finite when delta m is 0 basically. Okay, and z is not a special axis, so I just choose it arbitrarily. So no, any linearly polarized light I have, I can only have optical transitions between the same LZ states basically. So I cannot jump between different LZ states, okay, with linearly polarized light. That makes sense because linearly polarized light also doesn't have any angular momentum component uh, along the, let's say, that axis along which it is propagating. Okay. Okay. So, but if I have a circularly polarized light, let's say, where q is plus minus 1, so the light is propagating along the z direction, let's say, okay, then the light itself has an angular momentum Lz of 1, basically, and that will reflect in this calculation. And, to to make this e to the power I m minus m prime is equal to 0, q can be both either +1 or -1, etc. And I need m prime is equal to m plus minus 1 or delta m, which is the magnetic quantum number before transition and after transition. They can differ by 1 basically. So this is the selection rule. So for circularly polarized light, delta m should be 1. For linearly polarized light, delta m should be 0. So that's another selection rule basically. Okay. And then you can explicitly do the, continuing along the same path, you can do the integral for the orbital angular momentum channel basically. Okay. So if I just write down the let's say, the theta part of the integral, etc. Then I can define this quantity A, L, M, L prime, M prime, and Q basically, because I had this one Q also. So it turns out that it may depend on Q, let's say. Then I have this integral, etc. And I'm not showing this explicitly, but it is worked out in this book by Bradson and Jacochen, or you can also have a look basically. So it involves physics of angular momentum addition, which is done via this Clebsch-Gordon coefficients, etc. So if you just go a little bit there, then you can show that this integral will vanish explicitly unless delta L is equal to plus minus 1. Okay. There may be some easier argument to see this, but right now I do not know. Okay, so I'll look it up. If there is easier argument, I'll also tell you later. But this can be shown explicitly by doing some mathematics, basically 1 page, 1.5 page mathematics. Okay. So these are basically the selection rules, basically, which arise from these. And orbital angular momentum demands that delta L is equal to plus minus 1 for optical transitions, which is consistent with the parity rule, that delta L be odd, basically. Okay. And that sets us our selection rules, basically, which we will use for optical transitions. Okay. So any questions till now?
Sir, you said that centrosymmetric is the inversion through a center. So
Yeah.
if we take call it that roto inversion symmetry is a kind of centrosymmetry.
What
I
is
mean,
roto inversion? Rotation and inversion, right?
yes.
Yeah. So that's in addition to inversion.
No, I mean,
Right.
if
Yeah.
I rotate and the inversion is also the through a point. So can I say it is also a centrosymmetry?
So for saying, okay, so okay, I think this is a question of notation, right? Okay, so if I want to say something is centrosymmetric, right? First of all, I cannot say in general about a system. So for example, hydrogen atom, if I think naively, right, my Hamiltonian will look inversion symmetric, right? It just depends on R, etc., right?
Okay.
Yeah, but the wave functions may or may not be centrosymmetric, number one.
Function, okay.
Right, because we just saw that when I do this transformation r going to minus r, I get this minus 1 to the power L in the wave functions, right? So the s orbital is centrosymmetric. R goes to minus r, my wave function doesn't change.
Okay.
Right. Okay. But for the p wave, same thing is not true. Okay, so this is a very important point in quantum field theories also and quantum mechanics, etc., that the symmetry of my Hamiltonian may not be shared by the eigenstates.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the hydrogen atom problem, I cannot say that it's a centrosymmetric problem. The Hamiltonian is centrosymmetric. The eigenfunctions may or may not be. Okay. Yeah. Now, any specific observable I may calculate, etc., that may or may not be centrosymmetric, etc. So centrosymmetry, I'll always talk in respect to, let's say, in some sense of function, which I can explicitly calculate. Okay. And now, to define centrosymmetry, I do not need rotation at all. Okay, so that's a different symmetry. Roto inversion, that's a different symmetry. Okay, which is more stringent.
So here centrosymmetry is depends only this R factor.
R going to minus R, how does my function behave? That's it, nothing else.
Okay, okay, understand.
Okay, and in condensed matter systems, we generally have this lattices, etc. So there we will say centrosymmetric, depending on, R going to minus R, my crystal structure looks identical or not.
Hmm.
In some sense that, if I had a small bug at R and I send, and the bug can look all around 360 panoramic view, and I send to minus R, etc. It sits there and then it does a panoramic view all around and it gets the same photograph or not, basically.
Yes,
Okay,
right.
yeah, that's all, nothing else.
Okay.
Okay, and what you will call roto inversion is that you will send it to minus R and then you will also rotate it. Okay, and then you will ask, from there it takes a picture, panoramic view 360 degrees, and it gets the same view or not.
Okay, understand.
Right, yeah, so that's the thing. Okay. Any other question? Okay, if not, then let's go to the second part of today's lecture, etc., which is the big view. So how do you combine? So we discussed a lot of terms, etc. Fine structure, hydrogen atom without spin. Then fine structure, we brought in spin, LS coupling, other relativistic corrections. Then we did lamp shift, electric effects, magnetic effects, etc. Okay, so I'll just share a different slide. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing this. And I just want to show you a couple of pictures, basically, which will capture what I want to say. Okay, so let's just have a look at this picture, basically. Okay, so is the picture clearly visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, right. So let's start. So the y-axis is the energy axis. Okay, and I have this Schrodinger wave functions. So in the first line, let's say, to the leftmost side, I have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till n levels, basically, right? That's the Bohr model or Schrodinger equation, etc., without spin. Okay, so the Bohr model also almost accurately predicted these, etc., though in an ad hoc manner, and then Schrodinger equation modified that and improved that, etc. Okay, okay, that's number one. Okay, then the major corrections comes from this fine structure splitting, etc., which originates from relativistic effects, basically. So one is LS coupling, etc., plus this relativistic potential energy change or relativistic mass increase, and then I had another correction, Darwin correction, etc., which was relativistic kinetic energy. Sorry. So the relativistic mass increase was the kinetic energy correction, and I had another term which came from the Zitter-Bewigen, etc., which was potential energy correction or the Darwin correction. Okay. So all of these three, if you include, this is the action on the energy levels, etc. Okay. Now, very important that this picture is not to scale. This is just to demonstrate. Okay. So I do not, sense if this is minus 13.6, for example, then this change is not like, 1 EV or something. Okay. So this picture is not to scale, but one, let's say S energy level goes to even below that. 2s energy level also comes down, 3s energy level also comes down, and so on, etc. So all of these energy levels, ground state energy sort of increases, binding energy increases, basically. Okay, or the ground state energy becomes more negative. That is roughly the fine structure, this thing. Okay, and then there's a more subtle correction, which was the lamp shift, etc., which we cannot even come from, start from Dirac theory and obtain, etc., which essentially depends on, quantum theory of light matter interaction. So I start from Dirac equation, I take light matter interaction, etc., and that will give rise to this term, basically. Okay, and a very loose way of thinking about this is that I had this Coulomb potential, 4 pi epsilon by, so q square by 4, e square by 4 pi epsilon naught r, etc. So the quantum corrections, so the light matter interaction will basically modify this r, and you'll start seeing r plus delta r or something like that, basically. Okay, and with that changed potential, you calculate the Dirac equation, etc., energy spectrum, and that gives you a lamp shift, basically. So the lamp shift will slightly increase the energy of the 1s2 level, but since this is of the smaller than the fine structure constant, the total ground state energy is still lower than the original ground state energy without spin. Okay, and same thing you can see in the other lines. Okay, so these lines, basically. Okay. Okay. So this is a fine structure, so lamp shift, etc. Fine structure splitting, lamp shift. Now, Monday, Tuesday, we are going to do this hyperfine structure or nuclear dependent effects basically. Okay. So each of these lines basically, which is still doubly degenerate, we will find that they are still, get split into two lines or more. Each of these lines gets split into two lines basically. Okay. So the predominantly nuclear spin starts interacting with the electron spin and lifts the degeneracy of this two spin degenerate lines basically. Okay. So each of these lines starts splitting into two lines, etc. And this hyperfine effect is really, really small. So on this picture also, this is like, expanded by 100 times basically. So the real difference in energy times 100. So if I actually plot on the real scale, this will not even be visible basically. Okay. And experimentally also, this was discovered much, much later by very sophisticated techniques, etc. So lamp shift itself was, sort of 40s, early 40s, 38, 40, etc. Hyperfine was even after that, etc. Okay. And one impediment in observation of hyperfine structure was that all of these spectral lines basically, so we have calculated for stationary atoms, etc. Right? But the atoms are always moving, even in a small trap, etc. They will be moving around with a velocity of 10 to the power 5, 6 meters per second and things like that. Okay. So that gives rise to Doppler effects, basically. So basically, I'm calculating in a stationary frame, but the actual physics is happening in a moving frame. So once I transform back to the lab frame, etc., I get this Doppler shift of each of these energy levels, etc. Okay, so that is sort of small, but the hyperfine energy splitting is within the Doppler shift. Okay, and because of this, we were not able to identify this, etc., unless our experimental technique improved and we could, account for all the Doppler shifts, etc. So you could do what is called Doppler-free spectroscopy. Okay, so you could almost track all the atoms, etc., their movement, etc., and correct for all the Doppler effects, basically, so that you get a spectrum of a almost free atom. Okay, so you did that, and then our resolution of the spectroscopy improved, etc. Only then we were able to identify this hyperfine structure lines, basically. Okay, so that's the big picture of what we have been doing in the last 2 weeks, roughly. Okay, so before the
For
exam, we did fine structure. Yeah,
hyperfine structure,
sorry.
for hyperfine structure, what does this capital F means? F equals to 0, equals to 1.
Yeah, okay. So F will denote the nuclear spin plus the electron spin combination.
Okay.
Okay, so just like in an atom, we get this L, angular momentum, because of circulating electrons and the spin, and they can combine to give you a new quantum number, which was a J.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Then we will find that there is a nuclear spin and the electron spin. So they can combine to form a new spin operator, etc. Composite. So S plus the nuclear spin is called I. So S plus I we will call F, basically.
Okay.
And this is written in terms of the F eigenvalues, basically.
Okay.
Okay.
And can you explain what is the reason behind the lamp shift?
Yeah. So lamp shift is basically, we did in detail in one of the previous classes, but basically light matter interaction. So these are very, so one way to think, okay, so from a theory perspective, okay, so what is Bohr model, let's say, or Schrodinger equation? That's a non-interacting theory. So I took one electron, single electron, right? I took single electron, I said it is in a potential, and I solved a single electron in a potential problem. That's my Bohr part. Okay. Then I improved upon that by saying that, no, my atom, the electrons are still moving at 10 to the power 6 meters per second. So, close to relativistic energy. So I better use, relativistic kinetic energy to start with, etc. Okay. And that gave rise to this fine structure splitting, Dirac theory, everything. Okay. That is still a single electron problem. Okay. And in that problem, still I did not have light matter interaction. Okay. Okay. Now it turns out that in reality, in the universe, the atom, single atom, is never a single atom. It is always interacting with electromagnetic fields.
Yes.
Okay. So we need to solve that interaction problem. Okay. And it becomes even more dramatic when you think that, even when there is no photon, so almost no light, let's say, if I go to outer space, etc., in the vacuum, etc., right? And let's say I'm hidden behind some Earth's, let's say, shadow or something. So there is no light also in my immediate vicinity. Even there are electromagnetic fields basically in terms of what is called vacuum fluctuations. Okay, so the vacuum fluctuations are there everywhere, and they interact with atoms, etc. So we solve that interaction problem. Light and electron, they interact, etc. Always we solve that interaction problem, and that roughly sort of, if you like, gives a finite radius to the electron basically. Okay, and that if I include in the single particle picture, then I can estimate the Lamb shift. Okay, so this I will still observe even if I have not applied any external electric field or magnetic field, etc. It's just coming because light and matter interact, etc., in a very complicated way, and yeah, we just figured it out somehow.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so that's a complicated theory of quantum electrodynamics. Okay, and hyperfine structure we can still think in terms of single electron picture, etc., but then we will now start including two particle interactions. Okay, or broadly matlab sir, nuclear spin will start interacting with the electron spin. Okay, and that will give rise to hyperfine structures basically. And this picture still doesn't show you the Zeeman effect, Stark effect, etc., which comes in external magnetic field, which we also did explicitly. But this is a broad picture of change of spectral lines basically. Okay, so this I'll show you again in one of the future lectures so that this big picture is in mind. Okay, and then I have another slide, etc. So this was a very zoomed in picture, etc., where everything is expanded, etc., right? So just to get it on the scale, let's say. Okay, so this is now one of the lines basically for which we did explicit calculations. So 2s2p line basically. Okay, so 2s2p line is there. 2s would be like what energy? 13.6 by 4, right? So roughly 3 eV, let's say broadly, or 4 eV roughly. Okay, so this line is 4 eV from 0. Okay, so this line is 4 eV from 0, and then you have this splitting, which is 10 to the power 113. Sorry, so 1.13 into 10 to the power minus 5 eV basically. Okay, so that's the fine structure splitting, and then the lowest which we can get is basically this S half or P half lines, etc., which are like 4.5 into 10 to the power minus 5 eV, right? So I am starting from a number of the order of 4 eV broadly, or 3 eV, let's say. So let's say 13.6 divided by 4, so that's a number of the order of 3. So some EVs basically, and the fine structure splitting that we are talking about is 10 to the power minus 5 EV. Okay, so if we are not observed in experiments, we would never even have bothered to look for a new theory. Okay, so that's the important point. And these were already observed in early 1900s, etc. So even though we had quantum mechanics, we had all of this theory of Lyman, Balmer, Paschen bracket lines, etc., that would have been insufficient to we will not be satisfied, because I know there is something more there, etc., more splitting of these lines and so on. Okay, and then on top of this fine structure, you got this Lamb shift, etc., which now splits each of these. So this, for example, this line was double degenerate, etc., 2s half and 2p half basically. So it splits these two lines also, etc. And this correction was 10 to the power minus 5. Now the Lamb correction is of the order of 10 to the power minus 8 or 10 to the power minus 6 basically. So even one order smaller. So this was discovered in 1938 or something like that basically. And this was still quite complicated. So this is a very sophisticated theory from which we understand, etc. And the fact we know that the theory is correct because the Lamb shift calculation we have done to remarkable accuracy, and within the experimental limit, it is exactly reproduced basically. Okay, it's just a sort of a more involved theory. We will not do it in this class basically. Okay, or we may come to it later, 1 or 2 lectures. So this is what I wanted to show you. This is a big picture basically of all of this. So fine structure corrections, Lamb correction, order of magnitude, and yeah. So this is a big picture basically. Okay, and hyperfine structure we are still to do basically. Okay. So we'll not do hyperfine structure in a lot of detail. We'll just do one dominant interaction, which will give you this F, etc. So nuclear spin, electron spin interaction, and we'll just close that there basically. Okay. Okay.
So for nuclear spin in the
Yeah.
hyperthermal structure, so is there any, I mean, for their cell model or something coming here?
No, no, no. So this will not even be shell model. So this we can still understand in a semi-classical picture or just quantum mechanical addition of angular momentum, etc. Okay. So we do not need shell model till now. It will not come. Okay.
Okay.
But there are other corrections, etc., which you can calculate using shell model, etc. So finite size of the nucleus, etc., etc. Okay. So we'll not explicitly do those here, but they can be important somewhere else in some other experiments. Okay. For us, fine structure will only come from, predominantly will come from nuclear spin and electron spin interaction. So angular momentum addition and all that. That's it. Okay. Okay. So I'll stop this, and then I wanted to do a couple of problems today, depending on the last two lectures. Okay. But we are already reaching the end of today's time. But anyway, so let me share the notes again. And yeah, the problem is for you to try actually, and then I can send you the solution. But let's try that now. Okay. So just two problems, etc. So number one is this basically. So this is 5.6 of Jacob-Chan. So Jacob-Chan has a lot of problems. So let's say for this chapter, let's say chapter 5. No, sorry. So this must be chapter 6 actually. So this is written wrongly. So this is chapter 6.6. So chapter 6 has, I think, how many problems? So 6 problems only. And this is the sixth problem, let's say. So 6.6 basically. No, no, no. So this is not the 6.6. Sorry. Uh, okay. So I have written it wrongly. So this is 6.3 actually. Okay. So this problem is 6.3. So the next problem I wanted to solve was 6.6. But this is 6.3 basically. Okay. If you have online version of that book, then it may be a slightly different problem. So just figure out the number. But the idea is the following. Okay. So this problem is related to the quadratic Stark effect problem that we calculated in the class. And I said that we will not solve the quadratic Stark effect exactly in the class, but we can estimate a lower bound on the number basically. And we estimated a lower bound in terms of, the number was, minus 8 by 3 e square, small e square times a cube by z4, if I remember correctly. Okay. Okay. And then this problem is about estimating a upper bound on that number basically. Okay. So the first part of the problem is this trick that, second order correction in the perturbation theory, you can write in this particular format. Okay. So this is slightly different formula. So the normal formula is just this sum over k is not equal to n, h prime k n mod square divided by ek minus en basically, right? So all of these prefactors of ek by en are not there, etc. Okay. So that is the first part of this problem. And then second part of this problem is, suppose I start from this formula and then you ignore all the sums, basically this guy's k not equal to n sums basically. Then you can estimate the en2 for the second order quadratic effect just by means of these two terms, etc. And that should give you a upper bound because here if n is the ground state. So let's calculate this for the, again, same 1s or 2s 0, 1s 0 0, let's say. Sorry, 100 state basically, right? So if n is 1, then all other states of the hydrogen atom are above 1. So this is positive number, this is positive, this is negative, negative. So 1 effectively positive number, and this then becomes a negative number. So if I take out a negative number, etc., then this will be a upper bound of en2. So that's the idea basically. So you use this idea to calculate the second order correction upper limit basically. Okay. So you try this and I will send you the solution. So I have the solution here, but I will send it, let's say, later basically. So I remove them from part of this lecture notes when I update today, but you try this problem basically. Okay. So that is number one problem. I want you to try explicitly. Okay. If you're having a live class, I would have made you do in the class basically and looked at your progress, but you can try now if you want. And then the other problem I want you to do. So yeah, forget about this whole. Okay, so I can tell you the answer that we will get. So in the class, basically, we had obtained that E100, the second order correction because of Stark effect, etc., was given by this minus 8 by 3, 4 pi epsilon naught A0 cube by Z4 E square, basically. Okay, and if you solve this problem, then you will get the number as a upper limit, which is minus 2 into 4 pi epsilon naught E square A0 divided by Z4, basically. Okay. So this is the lower limit, this is the upper limit, etc. So lower limit is here, upper limit is here. So this is what this problem is about. And the actual number is here, basically. So minus 2.25, if you calculate exactly, Bethe, Wheeler, and these guys actually calculated this several series of papers. So if you calculate this exactly, then the actual number is 2.25, which is lies in between, basically. Okay. So this is an example of a physics problem which demonstrates that just getting a lower bound or upper bound can also be very useful. Okay. So in class, we explicitly did the lower bound. This problem is about getting the upper bound, etc. So I have changed the problem slightly, the wording, so that it appears as a upper bound actually. So they will say that we will do a rough estimation. So in the actual book, the problem will say we'll do a rough estimation, but you can estimate the upper bound. Okay, and this lies between this. So please solve this problem. So once you have this expression, basically, etc., then you can just immediately solve it. And the easiest trick is basically, so I also did not know how to get to this, etc. But then I thought that this expression is already given, so let me start from here, etc. Then I am thinking that why let me start from the exact expression and show that they are equivalent. So of course I can do that by doing left hand side, right hand side, etc. But then what I did was I just started from this expression, right? And then I noticed that my denominator has a product of two terms, etc. So I can write it as a partial fraction. So sum of only en and sum of only a term like en minus ek, so that I can get close to the original formula, etc. Right? And whatever extra terms I get must be coming from here. So that's all I did, basically. So I started from this term. Let's start from here, and then write it as a partial sum of two terms, etc. Basically, so you divide this, you calculate all of this a, b, etc. Then you will immediately end up with a proof of this formula using the same trick that we used in the class, that the sum over the states, basically, the projection operator, basically. If I take the sum over the projection operator of all the states, then that has to be an identity, basically. Okay, so you use that, then you can show this formula explicitly, etc. Okay, and then you can easily show that if I ignore the negative term, then this will be the lower bound. So this will be the upper bound of this energy correction, etc. And this you can explicitly calculate just following the class notes, etc., to obtain this. So that is problem number 1. And then I had another problem, which is this problem number 6. Okay, so now it is written correctly, this number. Okay. So this was so that was the electric field problem. This is a magnetic field problem, etc. So free electron, right? So absolutely free electron, let's say. So the kind of electron that will be in stars at very high energy, etc. Just p square by 2m kind of a dispersion, non-relativistic still. Okay, so non-relativistic free electrons, if I take the Hamiltonian in a uniform magnetic field, then show that the total Hamiltonian you can write in this particular form. So hxy and sz, two terms, basically, where hxy is given like 1 by 2m px square plus py square plus some parameter mu omega l, which will be a combination of the Bohr magneton and the magnetic field, etc. Okay, it's called the Larmor angular frequency corresponding to magnetic transitions and so on. So that serves as a harmonic oscillator strength, basically. Sorry, yeah. So harmonic trap, basically, let's say, and x square plus y square. Okay, and sz you can show that 1 by 2m pz square plus omega l lz. If you do not explicitly include the spin, and if you explicitly include the spin, which we'll have to do by hand for now because we are in the non-relativistic picture, then with the correct Landé G factor, etc., it will just come out to be 2sz correction to this. So this Hamiltonian you show. If you are able to show this, Then there are second and third parts of the problem, etc. So the second part is to show what will be the energy levels, etc. Because I can solve this explicitly, and you can write down the energy levels in terms of harmonic oscillator energy levels and the because these are sort of decoupled, right? So px py has decoupled, so these are harmonic oscillator energy levels, which we already know in some sense, and these are like sz operator is just in terms of lz plus 2sz, so I can write in the basis of lz and sz eigenvalues basically. So write down the energy eigenvalues, etc., and then compare it to the original problem, right? So this has become a harmonic oscillator plus magnetic coupling problem, right? But our original problem was free electron gas, electrons moving, but they're still in a magnetic field, etc., right? So that's a problem of Landau levels, etc. So the discrete energy spectrums are called Landau levels. So this problem was solved by Landau in the context of metals first, and then applied to stars, etc. So this is free Landau levels, etc. And then you can estimate what are these levels will be in a star, neutron star, basically, or something like that. That's the part C of the problem. Okay. So you try this. If you do not get this, then I'll send you the solution, basically. Okay. I was supposed to do this in the class today, but yeah. And yeah, so the starting point is just same. Basically, you do this minimal coupling, and we did part of this in the class also, but that was for a hydrogen atom problem. This is for a free electron, but exactly the same steps if you follow, you'll just get it. So you just will have two terms, e square, a square, and you'll have another term, which is this a dot p, because p dot a vanishes basically. So a dot p term. So each of these terms, if you solve, you will find that you can write in terms of these terms which are explicitly there. And I was in a hurry today morning, so I am missing some sign in my solution, which I'll correct before I send you. Okay. Okay. So I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, please ask. Okay. So if there are no questions, then let's stop here, and then we will meet again on Monday.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, Coulomb potential is centrosymmetric or not?
Coulomb potential is centrosymmetric. Any central potential is centrosymmetric. Yes.
Okay. Sir, R tends to minus R, then 1 by R is
Yeah. So you have to be careful about the vector and the scalar r.
okay, okay.
Right. In the Coulomb potential, it is mod of r vector, if you like.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Right. The r is the mod of the r vector. Okay. So I'm very happy to answer this because this was easy to answer. Okay. Yeah. Any other question?